right, welcome. Episode 31 of Divine Superconductor Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Ben Belty of Wild Food Warehouse. He has the best wild rice that I've ever had. I'll speak about that after the interview. But this interview is awesome. It's about an hour and a half. Ben is just awesome, super knowledgeable about rewilding, hunting, and gathering, especially the gathering part. He is an Acorn pro, so we talk quite a bit about acorns and starch and carbohydrates. And wait, won't these make you fat? Aren't they processed? Because you need to process acorns to digest them. Aren't they harsh on the system? So he goes through a lot of these myths and really talks about the ancestral history that these foods have. We also have a short Q&A at the end, which I think you guys will enjoy. Just a lot of really practical, awesome tips here in this episode. So without further ado, here's Ben Belty. All right, I'm here with Ben Belty. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Matt. I really appreciate you bringing me on so I can talk about interesting topics that I think we both kind of enjoy talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I follow you on Instagram, and I know you see my stuff, and it's so interesting, the diet fads. I think we're both watching like the carnivore one, and the idea that we can restrict a whole macronutrient like carbohydrate. I've seen you post some stuff about maple syrup and indigenous people that consumed like hundreds of pounds of maple syrup every year, right?
Oh, yeah. Different figures, as little as 50 to 100 to 150 pounds of maple sugar or syrup per person. So that sort of blows the myth out of the water that people didn't have sugar at all in the past, except for we also know that Europeans and Africans and Asians also had honey pretty much since the beginning of time. So the whole idea that we can restrict, glucose in the form of sugar because our ancient ancestors didn't have it is kind of a ridiculous notion, to me at least. When you do real anthropological and ethnographic research, you sort of find that a lot of the myths in the paleo and like carnivore communities are really just sort of like made up things, or people that use data just to support their hypothesis and just pretty much throw the rest of the information out of the water because it doesn't really suit what they're trying to sell. So
yeah, I mean, I just live on bulletproof coffee.
Yeah, some people just want to drink coffee and like eat butter, and then they think that's good. And oftentimes I see on different groups online, or I talk to people, and like they always talk about how they're so hungry, and the simple answer is to just eat. And when you tell someone like maybe you should just eat an extra meal in the day, they just shut down and they don't want to talk to you anymore. They might even call you a name. They might say you're crazy. You just never know what you're going to get nowadays in the health community. So I try to just focus on knowing what I require to have energy and to be energized all day. Sometimes I will naturally fast. I will just end up not eating for 6 to 8 hours or longer, and I feel fine. But the minute I feel hungry, I want to get some food because I want to keep the energy sustained. I don't want to kick into starvation mode. I don't want to kick into stress mode. I want to stay even keeled. Now, a lot of people I find with these different diet programs, paleo, carnivore, keto, intermittent fasting, people get on these hamster wheels of stress hormones, and they're just on this like back and forth between like feast and famine, and they think that this is somehow normal and that somehow humans manage to survive and be vigorous living this way, which is completely not true. we know that pretty much any organism, when it doesn't have enough calories, its ability to reproduce begins to decline significantly. So you can't really look at um, starvation as a way to thrive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think torpor or hibernation, like the elevation of serotonin and melatonin chronically, happens in a carb restricted state, right? And those are antithetical to fertility and virility and all of that.
Exactly. I mean, and people always have an argument about, well, the people that lived here, the people that lived there, and it's just like if you go to these places, like I've been to the Arctic, I've met Sami people. Now they don't live how they lived a few hundred years ago, but a lot of them are still trying, and they have stories of what it was like before. And it wasn't like some like famine state up there in the wintertime. Like they had skills and customs in order to preserve food through the colder months. This one guy that I met that's really trying to reconnect with being a true Sami person, he hunts like hundreds of animals a year, collects hundreds or thousands of kilos of berries every year that he puts up. So some people say, well, yeah, now we have freezers and dehydrators and all this stuff. Well, people in hundreds of years ago still had access to that same technology. It just wasn't like something you could go buy at Home Depot. They would use what was available to do what they needed to do. In the case of storing food, they would dry food, or even this guy showed us a spring that they would make baskets out of animal skins or out of bark from trees, and they would make them watertight, and they would fill them with berries, and they would stick them down in the spring, and then they would cover it up with tree branches and snow. That way the berries would always stay 54 degrees, which is the temperature of the ground when there's a spring coming out. It doesn't matter how cold it is outside, that area is always going to stay about 54 degrees, which is a little bit warmer than our refrigerators that we use today. They're about 40 to 45 degrees. But um, what we see is people had these technologies and they weren't starving like a lot of people in the paleo or carnivore community want to believe.
Yeah, I heard recently, like when you look at archaeological evidence and you don't find carbohydrate sources, that's because they wouldn't last, right? Like they're going to be decomposed if it's maple syrup or maple sugar, um, or even honey, right? I mean, versus finding like animal bones and stuff. That's easier to find in archaeological sites, but berries and stuff, there's not really going to be a trace of that.
Yeah, that stuff decomposes fast, but at the same time, it's like they still do sometimes find remnants of that stuff. They find fossilized, but that all that stuff gets like pushed to the side as if it doesn't, you know, mean anything. It's just like it was like a small part of what they did. But the truth is it wasn't. If you go to Scandinavia, I mean, even not far away from me, there's areas where you can go where there's hundreds of thousands of acres of berries to be gathered. Just like 5 or 6 hours from me, there's a place in West Virginia that like hundreds or thousands of people go every year to gather blueberries, and
Wow.
you can gather more than you could ever imagine of wild blueberries. But if you go to the boreal regions of the Earth, which is like Canada, Siberia, Scandinavia, Northern Europe, there is so much food there that no one wants to like talk about. But it's like, what was it like before farming and before industrialism happened? Like, we don't know, but we can look at it now and know that it's a fraction of what used to be available. So this whole like idea of like starvation and like food scarcity and like all that stuff, it's just totally not true. From everything that from all the data points that I've gathered, I think that people had access to overall more wholesome and nutritious food than we do now. But there's a bias against being able to get your own food, being able to have access to that land. I mean, now the government basically owns everything. So if you want to go forage somewhere, you're liable to get arrested, especially in the United States. Now, other countries have laws where it's a right to be able to hunt and gather and forage your food. Like in Scandinavia, for example, they have a law where you can camp and hike and move around within 100, I think it's like 100 meters or 1,000 meters of anywhere. So you can go and gather berries, like say from someone's backyard. Now, people don't do that because they want to respect personal space, but you're allowed to do that. If you do that in the United States, I mean, I go out and forage here in the city. There's a lot of ornamentally planted trees and things that you can forage from. And, I've been kicked out of places before for foraging. People ask you questions like, oh, are you going to die? Is that going to make you sick? And it's like, why would I be doing this if it was going to make me sick? You know what I mean? So there's just all these biases built in to our subconscious mind about food and wild food specifically. Like all of our food from should come from some like higher authority, when the fact is it's all available to us, and if it wasn't, we wouldn't have survived to where we are now.
I love it. And you and I, speaking of foraging, we share a passion for acorns. And about 3 years ago, yeah, I harvested them, made them into bars. It's a lot of work. It took me like a month.
Yeah, it does take time, but when you're born into a culture that's been doing that for such a long time, when you learn how to do that, it's just part of the daily routine. And it doesn't, like, to us it seems like such a big job, but when you were born knowing how to do it, it's like second nature. You just do it because that's what you have to eat, and that's all you have to eat. You can't just be like, you know what, these acorns are taking too much time. I'm just going to put everything down and go to the store and buy some potatoes, and you know, and that's that. I've been able to make myself pretty proficient with with gathering and processing acorns. I've got some tools that I use now, to where I can process like several gallons of um, of acorn flour in like a week, and
Wow.
then I have enough food for, you know, about a month or a month and a half, depending on how much I eat it. The thing with wild foods is people tend to like want to go all in. They're like, if I'm going to eat wild foods, and then that's the only thing I'm going to do, and it's like you don't have to do that. Like no, like almost no one does that unless they have to. I look at it like, okay, I'm going to eat what I eat, and then I'm going to add wild foods into the mix. Like, once or twice a week, I might have wild rice. A couple times a month, I'll have acorn pancakes. Maple syrup is something that I eat almost every day. Blueberries. I have blueberries pretty regularly. Um, it's one of those things that this diet culture, I think, breeds into us, is this extremism of like all or nothing. If I'm not doing it all, then I might as well not do it at all. When the reality is, it's like, if you look at keto people, it's like a lot of what they're doing, great, spot on, really good advice. But in order to sustain their identity, they have to only do that. And if they're not doing only that, then they don't have that identity anymore. And then, who are they? I mean, to me, they're more than that. But to themselves and to the group that they're in, they're like, you can't be they're not in the in group anymore. So, people are just sort of cast aside if you decide you want to do something outside the norm of the in group that you're a part of. So it's really weird stuff, to where like a lot of these diet groups, if they just would like tweak a few things, they would really like be much more holistic and wholesome, and a lot of the issues and the hamster wheels that these people get themselves into would not really be a problem. So I could go on and on for days about fad diets, because I've tried them all, for varying lengths of time, some longer than others. And to me, it all just ends up in the same place of feeling like there's something missing. And usually the something that's missing is the thing that you want the most, but it's also the thing that the fad diet is telling you that you cannot have under any circumstances.
That's a really great point. Yeah. I think you and I have both seen the seafood DHA and sunlight movement and how that's blown up, and people are believing all these quantum ideas and all these theories. And
Yeah, I mean, what does that even mean, quantum? Like, like I'm all for like studying the science of things, but when it comes down to it, it's like none of that real like nitty gritty compartmentalized science, like none of that really matters to me. Like what I want to look at is like what did people do in the past that sustained them for a significantly, long period of time, and they didn't experience chronic disease? Like what was it? And obviously nowadays we have a lot on our plate compared to what it was, even a few hundred years ago before industrialism. Like that's really where things took a big turn. But at the same time, like we can do it, we can get through it. We're just going to have to employ some new things that people didn't think of in the past, because there's always new stressors, there's always new things to consider and think about in this world where it's like we're basically emptying out the inside of the earth and putting it on the top, and then not knowing what to do with that after we've refined everything down to its base elements, many of which happen to be toxic. It's like, what do we do now? So while we need to honor the past, we also need to move forward with some strategies to sort of figure out what to do next. And that's where I like you, because you sort of go between like what's normal for humans, and then what can we do to sort of mitigate from what's happening now, all the pollution and the acid rain and all that stuff. That's really the information that you've been putting out that I've been really enjoying the most. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit and sort of tease out some of the different things with water and all that.
yeah, I appreciate that, man. And I was part of the spring water movement, and findaspring.com. I think that's a great website. And I used to get my workout in. I mean, driving 2 hours round trip, filling up, 40, 50 gallons at a time. And I did that for years, picking up water. And I didn't know that acid rain had a really powerful effect on the rocks, because it's so acidic that it liberates iron and aluminum, and that ends up in our aquifers. Not even to mention fracking and all of these other issues. So where I'm at now with water is, if you're traveling, I think it's great to drink that spring water from the local environment. I think there's information there, but as your primary source of drinking and even bathing water, I don't think it's ideal.
Yeah, that's something that I've been exploring more with all the information that you put out, because I do still do a fair amount of spring water. I do get like reverse osmosis. I've been getting it more lately. Um, the spring that I use is like, I mean, I know there's obviously like still issues with runoff and getting into the spring, but the spring that I use, very low TDS. So if someone's going to use a spring, you want to make sure the TDS is as low as possible. And the TDS on this is 60. And luckily, I have a raw water analysis, and it doesn't have any kind of, according to this raw water analysis at least, it doesn't have any of the like really nasty chemicals that a lot of other springs people are now discovering have. It's like, yeah, the water tastes great, and it's still better than drinking tap water, but there's some stuff in there that you don't want to drink. So it's like, yeah, it's probably better than tap water, but it's got this other stuff that's like, is it worse? Is it better? I don't know. There's so many new chemicals out there. Like we don't even know what the effects of them are yet, because they haven't been around long enough to. We're the guinea pigs. You know what I mean? We're the ones that are being watched by whatever government agencies that we may or may not know about, to see how these different chemicals that are getting released into the environment are going to affect people on a grand scale. And it's very unfortunate, but that's just kind of where we are. So that's why I like the stuff that you're putting out about the water filters, because I sort of like overlooked a lot of that for years, but now I'm starting to think more about it, because like, yeah, it's it seems counterintuitive to what I'm trying to do, but at the same time, you know, with what the modern world is producing on a mass scale, is so counterintuitive to what I want to do. It might make sense to employ a little bit of modern technology to sort of buffer against the modern technology that's definitely not good for us, definitely going to do us harm if we don't do something about it on a, even if it's on a micro scale. It's like sometimes like some problems are so big you feel like you can't do anything about it, but sometimes it's just the shift in mindset affects how your body reacts to everything at the same time. So there's always that to consider, your mindset of something versus like how it's actually going to affect you.
Yeah, well said. I think the stress piece, you and I are in agreement. It's like everyone's, screaming 5G is going to kill us right now, but stressing about it is a lot worse than the actual radiation.
Yeah, it just stress just it depletes the body of a lot of things, because when you're in a stress response, your body basically wants to get rid of everything that it doesn't need to like run away. Like it just dumps. It's like so many nutrients get dumped from your body because your digestion gets all messed up. Your microbiome can get damaged. Like there's so many things that happen when your body gets stressed, that being like we're already chronically stressed just because of how our lives are now. If you add on like any little extra thing for most people to think about, it's like it's game over for a lot of people. Like they just totally give up on everything, and they totally bow out, and they don't even want to try anymore. So I find with a lot of people, especially when I see like people starting to like kind of get into things, I don't I used to be very like I used to dump it all on them at once. Like if somebody would ask me a question, I would really just give it to them like really heavy, and not realize that like that person's never going to want to talk to me again about this stuff because I told them too much at the beginning. You really got to like give people hints and let them do their own research and let them create their own like sort of hypothesis on what's going on and how they're going to do something about it, rather than like trying to tell them like exactly what to do, because it's people don't need to be more overwhelmed than they already are.
I'm really glad you said that. Yeah, I think the leading by example thing is always better. That's what I found, especially a lot of people can relate with their family when you're like more woke or whatever. You're just more aware of things, and your parents or your siblings are, you see them doing very self-destructive activities. It can be very emotionally taxing. And so there's
Yes.
a whole thing that goes into that.
Yeah, you definitely have to have compassion for people, and I don't really like that using that word very much because it's so like overused in the like new age community. But I really feel like sometimes with people, especially your family, that just like looks at you and like they think you're crazy. It's like you just have to have compassion for where they are and know that they may never really accept what you're doing, but that's just kind of where they're at, and you just kind of have to let them be that, and just keep doing what you're doing, and maybe eventually they'll come around. Like my dad finally, after like me being into this stuff for like almost 15 years, is finally starting to come around and like wanting to like try some of this stuff that that I do, and some of the strategies that I employ. Like he's finally interested in it after so long. He's finally seeing like, oh, you know where was I when I was that age versus where is he when he's that age. So it's like people see this stuff and it might take a while, but finally it'll kick in and be like, oh, if I do this, it might give me a few extra years to enjoy my life.
Yeah, I like that. And I I was very say financially challenged for many years, and living with my parents, working a lot, 3 jobs, and going to school, just tons of pressure. And I find in this community, a lot of people think, oh, I don't have money to buy a water filter or to get a few tools here. And so I need to make more money to get healthier. But it's actually the exact opposite. You need to get healthier, and then you'll find more creative ways to support yourself, because your brain will be able to think more creatively because it's working better. That's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you just have to shed a lot of things, and you sort of have to go into this space where you just sometimes all you have to do to get healthy is just be like just consume less of whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like if you're somebody that like watches lots of movies or something, like you could improve your health just by like not watching movies for a couple of weeks. You will feel so much better. I know people that's like they watch movies constantly all the time. It's like if you just stopped watching movies for a while, your health would improve significantly. Like, or if you just stopped playing video games for a couple weeks, you would feel amazing. Like if you stop drinking like really bad quality coffee with tap water for like a couple of weeks, you will feel awesome. Like it's you don't
Well
have to
said.
make huge changes to feel massive benefits when you're trying to like improve your health. Everything's incremental. Every step kind of compounds the next, and you finally get to a point where you have all these things that you just do automatically, and you don't have to think about them anymore. But it takes time to develop this. Like it's like a mechanic assembling a toolkit. You pull all these different things out from all these different places, and then you have this strategy that you use. And when something happens, you start to feel like you get sick. You start to get insomnia. Like you just know, okay, if I do this thing, I take this herb, and I feel better, and you just kind of get yourself in a new pattern where you're treating yourself and take care of yourself rather than just ignoring everything around you and letting yourself constantly spiral out of control.
I love it. Yeah, I'm trying to think how many movies I watch. Probably an average of one every 4 months. And I just watch the futuristic ones, like Blade Runner 2049, Elysium, those kind of movies, because I think it's like predictive programming, like the dystopian futuristic
Mm-hmm.
movies. I feel like it helps me
Yeah,
be a better prepper. So
yeah, exactly. Like you see. Well, I mean, if you look at movies and like if you look at a movie from like so many years ago, and then you like look like movies that were made say 15 to 20 years ago are affecting culture now. Like people are seeing those images, and then like inventors and innovators and entrepreneurs are like seeing all these fictional things and then figuring out how to bring them into existence. Like maybe they may not be brought into existence like the exact way, but like these writers and these authors, they create these memes in culture, and then people see them on a big screen, and then hundreds of thousands or millions of people see these things, and then everyone's like, you know, this is the next million dollar idea. If I create this, floating car, I create this electric car, I create this robot that does this thing for these people, like I'm going to be a millionaire. And then you see 15 to 20 years later, these things that used to be in movies are now like real things, and you see them in fiction, and you're like, there's no way that that could ever exist. And then now here it is. We've got Tesla self-driving cars. We've got, people are going to be going to Mars to, go on vacation. I don't know how long that's going to last. We'll see. But, all of these things that people want to do that, in my opinion, move us further away from being human, other people think bring us more into who we're supposed to be, or who we were destined to be by whatever god they worship.
yeah, well said.
That's my conspiracy.
That for me, the Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, is really interesting because they have that mind-numbing drug called soma. And to me, I see on Instagram, wake and bake people with high, 90% THC, or just smoking joints from the second you wake up until you go to sleep. It's like cannabis all day long, grown with NPK, tap water, whatever. And that's like the soma. I mean, I think Brave New World is already in effect. I think Aldous Huxley was part of the club. you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's all wrapped up and packaged in like spirituality, so called. Basically, you can justify any bad habit now as like part of your spiritual path. Anything can be part of your, like, you take mushrooms all the time. Like you're just trying to like heal your neurology. You're trying to heal your trauma by taking all these drugs all the time. And it's like, you know what? These things have a time and a place for a specific culture, not maybe not for you. Maybe you could go visit that culture and learn about that culture and integrate yourself into a little bit, and then maybe you you earn the right to use those substances. But like, should someone in like downtown Manhattan that lives in like a pillbox apartment be like slamming gallons of ayahuasca on a regular basis? It's like that's probably not a good idea for your body. Temporarily, it might seem like a good one, but if you put it in the context of what that substance really is, it has nothing to do with any of the things that people are trying to attribute it to now. Like maybe it has therapeutic benefits for this or that, but it's like there's a bigger picture here that people just aren't seeing. And I think people are now starting to see it. It's taken a while, But I've known several people that have, experimented with all these different like exotic plant medicines as they're called, and they use them and they see benefits, but then they continue and they say like, oh, this is not really doing what I thought it was going to do long term. And then they kind of backpedal a little bit and realize like, I think I went a little bit too far down that rabbit hole. Maybe I'll step back a little bit. But sometimes the damage is already done, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think oftentimes like severe magnesium deficiency because of NPK fertilizers overlooked. And we were talking about stress earlier. It's like everyone's already stressed and everyone's restricting carbs, or they can't even store sugar in their liver. So you have no glycogen, you have no magnesium, and you have a ton of calcification and lipofuscin, and then you add this quote unquote plant medicine on top, and I think it causes brain damage.
Oh, I mean, it absolutely does. A lot of those things are like very purgative. So it's like you're already deficient in, this mineral, that nutrient, this vitamin. Like to put your body into a state where it's further going to purge itself, you're just you're just upsetting that equilibrium even more. Like you don't need like alkaloids, you need food. Like you just need to eat food. Like most people just don't eat enough food, or they eat so much food that has no nutrients in it at all that they continually eat because there's just nothing there, because their body is looking for nutrients that they're never going to get from the foods that most people eat on a daily basis, like, you know cereals and like highly refined grains. Like those foods have there's nothing to them. Now, a little bit of foods like starches and sugars and things like that can support your metabolism. But when that's all you eat and you're not eating more dense foods with nutrients in them, eating those foods will not help. You need to focus on getting your nutrients and then thinking about how you can like up your energy, in my opinion. Like it's kind of a balance between making sure you have enough nutrients and making sure you have enough energy, and it kind of goes back and forth, and you always want to make sure those both of those things, because when you kick the metabolism up too much but you don't have enough supporting micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, things like that, that can also throw you off balance too, which is one reason why I like wild foods, because the micronutrient content of wild foods is so much higher than cultivated foods like maple sugar. Lots of minerals, um, you know, lots of things that support the metabolism. Sugars, selenium, manganese, a lot of these things that help support the metabolism are in wild foods. Now, if that's, but you also need the animal foods to balance out the dense foods with proteins. I mean, protein is so important. Like everyone's obsessed with fat right now. But if you look at coconut oil, like everyone loves coconut oil. Like I'm not against it. I eat it. I put it on my skin. I use it on my hair. Coconut oil and white sugar, the only difference is one is a fat and one is a sugar. Both of them have like an equally lacking amount of nutrients, aside from, the lipid and the carbohydrate. But somehow sugar is bad, coconut oil is good, even though they're both empty calories if you really want to get down to it. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with consuming some empty calories if you're getting an otherwise nutrient dense diet, you're getting enough magnesium, your calcium phosphorus ratios on point, you're getting enough potassium. Like when all those mineral ratios are in balance, you can pretty much eat whatever you want and be fine. The problem is a lot of these foods that you don't want to eat, like polyunsaturated fats, either inhibit your body from pulling the nutrients out of the food that you're getting, or they just like shut your immune system down. But it's popular now to consume in excess foods that suppress the immune system in the name of helping the immune system, because it
Yeah,
sells. It sells very well.
yeah. I think you've looked into PUFA as well. And I just want to, I like a lot of the points you just made. And I think one important one
Yeah.
is the macro versus micro. And I find like fruitarians, for example, they're just focused on, okay, just carbs and like minerals in the fruit, which probably aren't ideal. And Irish sea moss is really big right now. And you can go both ways. I like your point there because you can focus just on carbs, proteins, and fats and forget about the trace minerals and the micronutrients. Or you can go the opposite way, which where I was, and I was like downing blue green algae and like liquidarian and just focusing on sprouts and micronutrients and I was coconut almond yogurt or whatever, and I was neglecting like strong animal protein, which isn't found in any plants.
That's how the animals build these things, is they consume large amounts of plants that we can't eat very much of without, getting bloated or getting sick.
Yeah.
There was something that I heard Ray Peat say in an interview where he talks about like so many people with thyroid problems, if they just stopped eating vegetables for a little while, their thyroid would work properly again. Because people like I I'm an advocate of like eating wild plants, but I think that there's a time and a place, and there's like a limit to how many plants you should eat. And then you should think about like eating calories and not just getting all of these phytonutrients, which I think can be beneficial to people. But when you're over consuming plants, plants best interest is for you to not eat them. So they're going to create ways for you to not eat them. Now, those defenses that they have can also benefit us in many different ways, but they can also harm us when we get too many of them inside of our body. I think there's a fine line between like medicinal and like poisoning yourself. And I think a lot of people go overboard. Like I knew somebody when I was vegan. This guy, he liked to eat a lot of spinach, like a lot of raw spinach. He ate a lot of nut butters. He ate a lot of tofu, and he ended up getting like a gigantic like growth on his neck. He got a goiter, and it turned out to be cancerous. I mean, and you would have thought this guy was vegan, like he was eating a lot of good food, a lot of good like health food store like vegan food, and he ended up getting cancer because he was eating so much like cold raw food with lots of like plant estrogens, and his body just like couldn't take it anymore. So he ended up getting like I don't know what kind of cancer he had, and he ended up recovering from it. And it was really sad to see it happen, but like he definitely got cancer from being vegan because he was just eating so much estrogenic food all the time that his body just couldn't take it anymore. That was several years ago when that happened, but
Oh, I used to eat a ton of apples, and I think I was doing like 5 or 6 apples with like 2 jars of almond butter a week. I did that for like several years, 3 years at least straight. And now researching lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin and how pectin feeds that. And then you just look up endotoxin space, whatever X condition you have, acne, I don't care what it is, and you'll see a link between this, bacteria that you could feed with apples. It's incredible.
yeah, and I think that especially with a lot of the like modern domesticated fruits, they have so much more pectin than I think other fruits did in the past. Now, pectin can have benefits as well as drawbacks, but the problem is, the dose. Like with anything else, it's like the dose is the poison. So it's like eating some pectin and some fruit is great, but if that's all you're going to eat, you're going to create some imbalances in your body, and that's one of the reasons why I like Chinese medicine, because they look at the qualities of foods and then like the physical or spiritual conditions that they create within the body. A lot of carbohydrate foods, like really wet, damp foods, they increase bacterial growth in the body, which is endotoxin. So when people get too far on the spectrum of like raw, fermented, you know, foods with all this lactic acid that's going to like suppress their metabolism and do all this stuff to their body, it's like, you know, these foods were not meant to be like staples. They were meant to be like condiments and like icing on the cake, not the main course. Is how I look at a lot of the like fermented foods and stuff like that.
I'm with you there. Yeah, I fully agree. Have you experimented with like deer antler, elk antler, pine pollen? It's funny;
Oh
those
yeah,
are big in this space.
I love all that stuff. I think that I'm still a little bit too young to really take a lot of that stuff. But I think deer antler is great. I think it's really good for regenerate. Like if you have injuries and stuff, it doesn't matter what age you are. If you take that stuff, your injuries are gonna definitely heal. Um, Pine pollen, I think the powder when you're under 40 is the way to go. When your testosterone starts to drop, I think taking it like in an extract, like an alcohol extract, is great to keep the testosterone level. I've definitely seen people go overboard on the pine pollen, especially the tincture. Like I think it's Stephen Buhner. I listened to an interview of his like years ago, like maybe geez 8 years ago or something, and he was just like, if you're under 30, don't take pine pollen tincture unless you absolutely have no testosterone in your body because it's bioidentical testosterone and it'll get your levels cranked. And if you get them too cranked and you're young and you're still producing your own, you can run into some problems with your body not being able to produce its own testosterone anymore. So the powder, I think it's great. It's a good nutritive like flour substitute. I like to use it like bake it into stuff, use it like sprinkle it on my food as like a kind of like a an enhancer, put it in a smoothie, stuff like that. But I think most people, unless you know your testosterone's really low, take the tincture sparingly, we'll say. But I do love that stuff. And there's tons of benefits to pine pollen. There's like anti-radiation effects, um, obviously the hormone effects, micronutrients, minerals, stuff like that. I mean, pollen foods in general can be really good. Like even like edible flowers, things like that. Like they all have pollen, and they're all going to impact our hormone systems in a positive way.
I love it. Have you experimented in your foraging ventures with like gum resins or tree resins? Because that's something that I wanted to get into, like as for poultices and different things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've done a lot with pine resin, spruce, cedar, all those different resins. I used to buy this gum. I haven't for a while. I've tried to make it my own. Like I've chewed on tree resins before and used them for like wounds and tooth healing and stuff like that. They're really magical, like antimicrobial substances. I used to buy this gum though. It was like just straight up chewing gum from Russia. That was made out of I think it was like pine and cedar resin. It was really good stuff. I haven't been able to find it for years now, but that stuff has a really amazing ability to heal your teeth, to clean up your mouth, to clean up your digestive system, to kind of get your microbiome in check. Those tree resins are really amazing stuff. They seal and they clean out like undesirable bacteria from your body, like just totally take care of them. I know there was a lot of old folk remedies with like turpentine, which is like distilled pine sap, essentially, is what it is. Anti-parasitic, stuff like that. Um, I've used pine resins before on like cuts, so like you can mix it with other things and make like a glue, and you can put it on wounds and things like that to heal the wound. And you just you make it and you put it on the wound and then you bandage the wound up, and it not only does it obviously kill the bacteria that you don't want in there, it also keeps the wound moist because it keeps the moisture inside the wound. And when wounds are kept moist and free of bacteria, they tend to heal the best. A lot of people want to let their wounds dry out, and that's how you end up with scar tissue and stuff like that. There was somebody I can't remember, one of those health guys. I don't remember who it was. It may have even been Ray Pete. I don't know. Was talking about how if you can keep if you could keep if you could keep your finger in a certain state of moisture, you could actually like regenerate like your finger and your bone and everything. Like if you cut the tip of your finger off. I don't know how true that is, but to me it makes sense because if you think about the womb that all life is created in, it's a very moist environment. So if you could create a similar quality on a healing wound, then you're going to end up with a much better result, as long as you can keep it sterile. which
I
can
fully
be
agree.
can be the tricky thing to do when you're cleaning, keeping wounds, clean and stuff like that.
Yeah, people think, oh, you'll get gangrene or something, but if you have the internal antimicrobials flowing, I think propolis is probably very similar in effects, right, to the tree resins.
Yeah, I mean, and I believe propolis is essentially, a lot of. There's actually a lot of tree resins in the propolis because the bees go out and gather that stuff and they bring it back, and that's what the bees use in their hives when they get when there's like damage or when there's like outside invasion from different like mites and things like that. I think they actually use the propolis as like a defense inside their hives. I'm not very well versed on beekeeping, but I do know that the quality that we know in propolis is also the quality that the bees sort of use it for.
Interesting. And I'm curious, how do you recommend harvesting tree resin? Like, I think I saw some YouTube videos and they were like, you should cut, I forget if it was vertically or horizontally so you don't harm the tree. And then you could come back in a few days and you'll see it coming out. Or just on a hike, sometimes you'll see it oozing out, right?
Yeah, it's vertical is the best way to do it. Anytime you're harvesting bark from a tree, you always want to go like vertical because say you can pull off like 3 inches wide and go up 5 feet, and you're only going to harm that much tree. That whereas if you took an equivalent like square footage from the tree, like going horizontal around the tree, you can quickly like uh, cut off the entire nutrient transport. I can't remember the different parts of the tree right now, but what you essentially do is you cut off the blood vessels of the tree if you circumscribe the tree. Whereas if you go up and down, you don't cause that same damage, which is kind of funny because on humans it's the opposite. Like when someone cuts their wrist or whatever, they're more likely to die if it's parallel to the bone rather than across the bone. But with trees, it's opposite. You want to peel, short width, long length. When you're harvesting resins, I find you make the cuts and then you want to come back like several days later because when the resin's really fresh, it's very sticky. But if you come back like a few weeks later, the resin will have bled out and then it starts to dry out. So then it's not so sticky. It's more like chunky and dry, and it's much easier to harvest. It's a lot less messy. Um, and at that point, the more dry it is, the easier it is to like actually like chew on and then use. And then if you need to make it more sticky, you can like reconstitute it with a little bit of water and then start working with it from there. You can also take the resin and you can take other herbs and mix it up with the resin, and then the resin kind of makes like a sticky, paste. You can do with other herbs, oregano, stuff like that. If you want to make something really super strong, like antimicrobial to like treat like an abscess tooth or like an infected cut or something like that, you can mix it with other herbs and put it in there and then bandage it up. It's good stuff. Tree resin is like it's like nature's antimicrobial super glue.
I love it. And can you break down your whole acorn process? Because I think it's fairly simple, right? It might sound overwhelming to people, but it's a pretty straightforward process, right? To make acorns into food.
Yeah, so I'll preface it with a few things. Acorns, everyone looks at them as a nuisance. What they should be looking at them as is like the best corn substitute there ever could have been before we started growing so much corn. The problem with acorns is they have tannins, they have anti-nutrients, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with what anti-nutrients are. A lot of the different ones, phytic acid and tannins, are like the main anti-nutrients that you need to think about in acorns. So, in order to make the acorns edible, the primary anti-nutrient that you're trying to remove or reduce are tannins. Phytic acid removal or deactivation in this case is more of a side effect of leaching out the tannins because it requires water. So at the same time you're leaching the tannins, you're also activating the phytase enzyme, which are also in all of the seeds and nuts that we eat that you want to get rid of when you sprout them or soak them. So the process with acorns is a bit daunting to some people. To me, farming is daunting. I would rather go out and gather what's already growing for me that I don't have to think about until it's time to think about it. When you're growing vegetables or grains or anything, like, you constantly have to be worrying about what's going to eat your food. Like the deer, the rabbits, they're going to steal your stuff. The birds are going to come down. Like acorns, yes, they are food for wildlife, but they produce so much that, one, usually you can beat the squirrels and the deer and stuff to them. And also, like, they can be low on the priority list of the wildlife because there's so many other good things for them to eat that they don't have to, like, worry about anti-nutrients with, that they're just going to go for other things before the acorns, and then they usually switch to the acorns like later in the season. So I gather my acorns usually like September, October, November. There's two different kinds of acorns. I'll talk about them real quick. One's a white oak, one's a red oak. The red oaks have pointy leaves, and the white oaks have round leaves. I prefer red oaks, though they are higher in tannins. They have a better taste, and they have a lot of the same type of fatty acids as olive oil. So it's kind of cool that you can get, some of the benefits of olive oil without actually having to get olives. You can, do it with local food that pretty much everyone has access to, at least in the United States or Canada. So you gather the acorns. It's easy. You can process them fresh, but it's easier to do it if they're dried, because they come out of the shell easier. So what you do is you gather all your acorns, you let them dry out a little bit, then you crack them, and then once they're cracked, you sort them and make sure there's no rotten ones, because sometimes they get rancid like any other kind of nut. You sort out all the good ones, you rinse them a few times, you let them soak in water for maybe 4 to 6 hours. You can let it go overnight if you want. And then you put them in your blender. I recommend a Vitamix or a Blendtec. Like, you really need to have something really stout that has a good motor in it with a lot of torque. You then grind them up in the blender. We'll say you don't want to fill it more than half with acorns, and then you fill it all the way to the top with water. You turn it on and you let it run 5, 6, 7 minutes until all the acorns are totally, like, as fine as the machine will get them down to in the water. And then you'll have to pour them through some sort of a mesh strainer system to get the water out. At this point, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can put them into a jar and then put more water in there, and then every couple hours or days, depending on how much time you have, once the acorns have settled all the way to the bottom, you then decant the clear water on the top, and then you add new water in, and you stir it and you shake it up, and then you let it settle again. And every time you mix the water up with the acorn meal in the jar, the water is going to pull the tannins out, because the tannins are a water-soluble compound. A lot of people know tannins because tannins are in chocolate and wine, tea. A lot of plants have tannins because tannins, I believe they're a natural pesticide and an antioxidant, so they prevent microorganisms or insects from consuming them. Because things that are higher in tannins tend to take longer to rot. Case in point with the acorns is the white oak acorns on average have less tannins. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they have more tannins. So the white oak acorns sprout quickly after falling on the ground, especially if it's moist. They'll start to sprout within days or weeks. Red oak acorns, on the other hand, since they have more tannins and they have more phytic acid, they'll take longer to sprout. You can gather red oak acorns all the way in to the early spring of the next year, and then once the rainy season comes, then you tend to lose them to sprouting. You can eat sprouted acorns. I don't really think they taste that good. They kind of have a weird taste. Some people like them. I don't go there. Like, sprouting is cool, but I got to draw the line somewhere. And there really isn't a whole lot of literature that states that people ate sprouted acorns, because at that point in the year, there's other things available to eat to where you just don't even need to. You can just move on to something else. So what you want to do is when you're decanting, you want to make sure not to pour any of the meal off. The water will change colors at a certain point. Especially if you're using red oak acorns, the water will start to turn red, and that's just a little bit of oxidation. That means that the tannin level is really starting to drop a lot. So you want to continue doing that for another few days, and then what you do is you'll pour the water out as much as you can get out without spilling any of the meal. Then you'll want to scoop all the meal out into a cloth as fine as you can get, not too fine, but fine enough. T-shirts actually work really good. Like I get like an organic cotton T-shirt, make sure it's really clean, and I'll pour all the meal into that, and then I'll squeeze it out. As much water as I can possibly get out. At this point, if the flour doesn't taste bitter anymore, you can now use it just as it is, wet. Some people like to dehydrate it. I don't usually dehydrate it unless I want to like take it on a trip with me, camping, whatever. I'll just use it wet until it's gone, or you can also freeze it in that state that it's in after you squeeze it out of the ball. I don't break it up at all. I just take the ball and I'll put it in a jar and I'll freeze it as it is, and then I'll take it back out and let it thaw when I'm ready to eat it. I probably go through, I don't know, 5 to 10 gallons of acorns a year. This past year, I haven't done a whole lot of with acorns because I've just been doing a lot of other things. But I do have like maybe 10 or 15 gallons that I need to process. I mean, that's a lot of calories right there. And that's another thing to consider. Acorns were eaten by the indigenous people on every single continent where they existed. I think the only continent that doesn't have acorns is like Australia and Antarctica. Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, South America all have oak trees. And the people in those areas that existed there before industrialism and before colonization and all that stuff, if acorns were available, people consumed them. Now, some people use, this was big like maybe 5 to 6 years ago in the paleo thing, they tried to use acorns to discredit carb consumption. They said, I think it was in Morocco or somewhere in northern Africa, in some cave, they found some skulls that had some rotten teeth. Now, people say it was because they ate the carbs, and the carbs made their teeth rot. Totally false, a total misconstruence of data. What happened is these people happened to be in a famine. They were so hungry that they ate acorns that they didn't leach. They ate so many of them, it caused their teeth to go bad and they died. If they would have leached those acorns, they would have been fine. But they didn't get the memo. They were starving. They were stressed. Who knows what it was? They didn't end up doing that. So that's what contributed to their tooth loss. It was not the carbs in the acorns. Carbs don't sit in your teeth and rot like people think they do. Yes, it's possible, but that's like an afterthought. That's like when your metabolism is low, when your immune system is trashed, when your body is not functioning optimally, that's when the pathogens come in from the outside. When you have a functioning metabolism, you're able to like purge things and get like, that's why you get a fever, because your body is kicking your metabolism up and your immune system is raising your body heat. It's using what it has to create a hot condition in your body to essentially sterilize your body. And anything that's like foreign to your body is going to get killed by that fever. So back to acorns. There's so much nutrient density and caloric density in acorns that they were oftentimes 50% of calories of the people that ate them, especially California indigenous. 50%, pretty much exclusively throughout the year, they would eat acorns and other tree nuts that were very high in starch, like chestnuts and buckeyes, which a lot of people think buckeyes are poisonous, and they are if you eat them raw. But there's ways to process them. There's that funny word about food, processed food. If you process them properly, they're like mashed potatoes. Now, do you think that people should not eat them on principle that carbs are bad, or do you think people should eat what's available? You tell me. You know what I mean? Like that was the turning point for me. Like when I was into paleo and stuff, and like I started to get more and more into the wild food thing. Like that's when I saw like carbs have been available to people for as long as they've been able to figure out how to process food. That's been quite a while. Humans, hominids have had the ability to reason and to invent tools to render food from the landscape. Like that's what being a human is about. It's about taking things in the natural world and rendering them into useful products that support life and support prosperity and thriving. To me, that's being a human. Is when you're able to create things out of your environment that help you thrive and live in harmony and coexistence with what's around you.
I appreciate that breakdown. What are the nutrients in acorns? Because I think both you and I have looked into unsaturated fats, and there are some PUFA in the acorn, but it's mostly carbs, and there's quite a bit of protein, right?
There is, yeah. So depends on what it depends on what kind of acorn. White oak acorns tend to be very, very low in lipids and very, very high in carbohydrates, starches, and moderate to low in proteins. Red oak acorns tend to be higher overall in fats, more moderate in carbs, and then like, say maybe 15 to 20% fat, 60% carbohydrate, and then the rest protein. I can't remember for sure, but I do think that the amino acid profile on acorns is really nice compared to other things. Um, there is some polyunsaturated fats in acorns, but there's also monounsaturated fats, and there's some saturated fats. It just depends on what the species is and where it exists. The thing about PUFAs is I find they occur more the further north you go. PUFAs tend to be higher in the food, and I think this is just a hunch of mine that the further north you are and the less exposed to sunlight you are, the less PUFAs are going to bother you, and that's why they occur more frequently in organisms in food sources further north you go. Further south you go, the closer to the sun you go, the more oxidization there can be from the sunlight, the more you need saturated fats that resist the oxidation of the sun. So my theory is the further north you go and the less sunlight you're going to be exposed to overall, I think you can like get away with a little bit more PUFA. But the further south you go, the less you want to, ingest, and the more you want to think about, you know, avoiding. Because if you look, the primary nutrient sources closer to the tropics is coconut oil, some animal fats, but animals tend to be leaner closer to the equator. So there's that. But so we want to go back to acorns. The starch in acorns will help your metabolism function at a level that you didn't know was possible. Like when I had like not eaten carbs that much for a little while, and then I started experimenting with acorns and started eating those carbs again, man, my body felt so good. Like my metabolism was just like on point. Like like that was the turning point for me. Like that's what made me realize like the benefits to the metabolism that eating carbohydrates has. Um, and that's obviously why these people ate these foods, was because the nutrient value and the caloric value is so great that that's how you get stuff done. You don't get stuff done by being in this chronic fasted state, like where you're like somewhat lethargic, and if you're not lethargic, you're just like you're ramped up on adrenaline and cortisol, and that's where you're getting your energy from. You're not getting your energy from like making, burning glucose to make ATP. You're getting energy from like essentially from depletion and stimulation that eventually runs out.
I love it. I fully agree. And I'm really glad you brought up the starch aspect because I feel like even more than sugar or maybe equal, but starch gets demonized. And so, potatoes are bad, right? And then, oh, acorns have starch. Acorns are bad. But what is the big misconception, especially in the paleo community, about starch? Because they think it is inflammatory, right? Is that like the primary argument?
Honestly, I don't even know why they hate it so much, other than like they say that it makes you fat, and somehow like putting on weight is like a bad thing. Like I obviously don't think people should be obese, but I also don't think people that live where it's cold most of the year should be like devoid of body fat either. So it's like carbs make you have a little bit more body fat than maybe you think. Like I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing. Like starch keeps your body warm. Like if you're cold and you're fasted in the middle of winter and you eat a couple potatoes, like your body temperature is going to go up like 2 or 3 degrees, and it's going to be the difference of like being able to go outside when it's cold and not. So like the demonization of starch, I think it's just like another one of those things that like it's like everybody eats starch, so it's like it's a good selling point for anything to like say like don't do this thing that everyone else does and you'll be in an exclusive club and you'll like attain some mystical powers if you like don't do like a normal thing that everyone else does because it's healthy. If you demonize like a normal thing that's healthy as being unhealthy, whatever you're selling is going to sell because people love to believe like the norm is bad. Now, granted, I think a lot of the modern day norms are not good for us, but when you study like the past and what was normal before modern times, it's like a lot of things that we do now mirror that in some way. And it's easy for people that sell supplements or diet programs to demonize these things and make a lot of money telling people this stuff is bad, even though it's really what they need. It's the antidote to their problem when it comes down to it.
That's well said. I love it. Well, hey Ben, let's jump into the Q&A because this will probably take a little bit of time. um,
Yeah.
the first question is,
So many tangents.
I love it. No, you're a wealth of information. I love it. Someone's asking me about D. D'Amato's blood type diet. It seems pretty accurate. I've been getting a lot of questions about the blood type diet, and I think Adam Bergstrom, that I've had on a few times, says that just two types need meat, and that's like basically all you need to know. I think it's like type A, B, and O or something like that. But have you looked into that
Yeah,
much? Or
I have somewhat. I think I like read leafed through that book and read a few chapters, like the Blood Type Diet book or whatever that came out like however many years ago. I definitely think there's something to it. Like I know people that are like O, and they tend to like not really like a whole lot of dairy and like coconuts and certain things. They tend to like be better on meat and like say veggies and basic foods, simple foods. Whereas like I'm like an A, I think I'm like an AB positive or something. And like I just have always had an affinity for dairy and seafood and some meat. And like so I feel like for me it rings true. It's one of those things that's like take the information, sort of experiment with it and see what works, see what doesn't. I don't think it's anything that anybody really needs to like, follow to the letter of the law. It doesn't really need to turn into like a diet Bible or anything like that, but I definitely think it has some good things to offer people that if that's all you got, then I think you're doing pretty good. Sort of my take on it.
yeah, I agree. It's like a good starting point. Is lard beneficial? This kind of goes back to what you were saying about coconut oil, because I get a lot of questions about what should I cook in, and I think a lot of people are using like avocado oil, but really ghee and lard and tallow are excellent, right?
Yeah, avocado oil kind of freaks me out a little bit. Like, what part of the avocado does it come from? Like, I've read that it's like some of it's from the seed and some of it's like actually the fruit that they somehow like I guess centrifuge or are they using chemicals to extract? Like Like, how do you extract the oil from an avocado? I don't know. Anyways, with regards to lard, um, lard, I think is a good food if you know the source. If the person that's producing the lard is feeding their pigs um, lots of corn and soy, that lard's definitely going to be like a suboptimal quality compared to like a farmer that's feeding their pigs like a moderately low amount of corn and then like a higher amount of like barley and other like wild foods. Like there's a farm here that I actually used to work for. They would feed their pigs um, some like bourbon, uh, like leftovers. I can't remember the mash. So they would feed it bourbon mash, which is like a lot of rye. So compared to like something else, it's not going to have as much PUFA in it. They were feeding it like acorns and tree nuts and stuff like that. And you can tell when a pig is eating tons of PUFAs, the lard is much more liquid at room temperature. When a pig is eating other things like more tree nuts and getting like more monounsaturated fats, when that butter is sitting or when that lard is sitting there, it's almost like butter. It has a much like more viscous quality to it versus like, you know, the conventional lard from like pigs that are raised indoors that are only eating corn and soy and who knows what else versus like the pigs that are outdoor getting sunshine, stuff like that. Because lard does have some like it does have kind of like a hormone quality to it, so it's going to have some vitamin D. It's going to have some stuff like that if the pigs are raised outdoors. If the pigs are indoors, you know, that's probably a lard that I would avoid versus one that's, you know, coming from an indoor or coming from an outdoor source. So look for farmers that raise their animals outdoors and feed them more than corn and soy. I would say if you can cross off those boxes, I'd say you're doing pretty good with the lard.
I like it. Yeah, I found a company at Paleo FX called the Piggery, and they're like
Yeah, I
popularizing.
saw that.
It's so cool. And what are your thoughts on like trichinosis? And when I broke my vegan fast, I went on like a bacon binge. You know, I not every day, but like once a week. And do you think uh, there's trichinosis eggs in bacon, even if it's good quality?
You know, I can't say that I've ever seen that. I actually worked at a slaughterhouse for a little while, and it's like I wasn't the one doing the killing, but I was in the slaughtering floor when they were doing the killing, and like I would look at stuff all the time, and like I never saw, and like I asked the guys that worked back there, I was like, hey, have you guys ever seen like worms in a pig or worm? They're like, very, very, very rarely do we ever see that, and usually it's a farmer that doesn't take very good care of their animals. But most farmers like don't want to raise sick animals, so like they're gonna give the animals like herbs and feeds that are gonna prevent the trichinosis from happening. I personally, to me, it's not an issue. Um, if you're shooting wild pigs, I think maybe it would be a problem. But again, like you can see the animal, like you can look at the meat and kind of like intuitively know like should I eat this or not? Like you know, and kind of go from there. I think it was like Steve Ranella, the meat eater podcast guy. I don't know. He's like a big hunter guy. I think he got trichinosis one time from like I don't know if it was a bear or what it was, but like he ate something and like he said he's like I knew I shouldn't have eaten that, but I did anyways because I was hungry, and I think he did end up getting it. But it's like one of those things where it's just like use your discretion. Like is somebody really going to be selling like some meat that has like parasites in it? Like it's very, very unlikely that that's going to happen. Like the USDA, like as much as I don't like the USDA, like if they see parasites in something, they're not going to let it fly. Like there were so many other like trivial things that like our meat would get like scrutinized for that like if there was trichinosis, it would have been like a big deal, and it never happened. So, do I think trichinosis is a big deal? Not really. Use your best judgment. Talk to the farmers. See how they feed their animals. You know all that kind of stuff.
I fully agree. And I think you and I follow the vegans and you see them posting all the time, like salmon at Costco. I've seen that video like 20 times. And there's like a white worm, you know, right under the plastic. But with seafood, it's probably more of an issue. And we're talking about conventional. So with seafood, I pay a premium and I'll restrict it in order to get a higher quality source. Like, in other words, find a good
Exactly.
seafood place, right?
Yep, exactly.
Thoughts on fasting in general? I have a question from someone about that. Kind of context, right?
I
Maybe your
mean,
stress levels.
if you work 50 hours a week at a factory, don't fast ever, unless you're going to go on vacation for a month. And then maybe you could fast like in the middle. But like if you're experiencing like external chronic stress, like focus on like supporting your metabolism and like keeping your stress down with food, because like you're not going to really do yourself any good. Like when you're in a constant state of like being like torn down by physical labor, you're not going to regenerate yourself by degenerating yourself, and that's what fasting does. Like I think there could be a time and a place for it, but like by and large the way that fasting is being used now is like people are abusing themselves like beyond belief.
I fully agree. Yeah. And there's this misconception about detox, right? And it's like, oh, take away all the fuel for the body and buzzword autophagy. But guess what? You need to get rid of the PUFA to have autophagy work. And you need glycogen to fuel the liver because that's
Yeah,
like our primary detox organ.
like when yeah, I mean fasting just creates like a cold, it can create like a cold quality in the body. And when your body is cold, it's tense. So its ability to like let go of toxins and like things that you want to get out of your body is diminished. When your body is warm, it's more able to safely remove toxins and things out of your body. So you want to like, rather than trying to fast, consider supporting your thyroid function before you think about fasting. Like start there. Like get your metabolism working, and then then see where you're at and see how much better you feel versus doing what's not going to support your metabolism. Compare notes.
I love it. um, what are your thoughts on the argument that humans are not designed to eat meat? The intestines, the teeth.
Who's the designer, and what were they designing for? I mean, to me, I'm not an atheist, but I'm also not really a Christian either. To me, if we're going to talk about what designed us, we can talk about our environment, and our environment, has lots of animals in it that are easy to catch and kill and eat. So, yes, I think we were designed to eat meat because we emerged from our environment doing that to survive with vital health.
I love it. What's your perspective on epigenetics, epigenetic environmental factors based on latitude? I guess diet based upon where your ancestors are from, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely a component to that you have to consider. I've a lot of ancestors that are from Northern Europe, Sweden, and things like that, and I'll tell you, like, I absolutely love blueberries. Like, I can't get enough of them. And if you go to Scandinavia, like, there's tons of those fruits available. So, um, yeah, I think it's definitely something worth considering. Figure out where your ancestry is from, and then sort of see what foods you can source that are from that same environment. Maybe not necessarily from that same place, but what foods can you get where you live that are similar in quality and nutrient profile to what your ancestors would have been eating, however many years ago. I think there's definitely something to that.
Awesome. How is our microbiome influenced by our genetics?
That's honestly not something that I have a ton of knowledge on. I do know that, say, when a child is born, there are bacteria that are passed on to that child from the mother that if you are part of an unbroken chain of, say, breastfeeding people, you're going to be getting bacteria that have been like in your lineage for a very long time. But a lot of us in the modern world didn't ever get breastfed at all. So we're being denied a lot of those bacteria that we would have otherwise been exposed to. So I think that being cognizant and like aware of how what we eat affects our microbiome is definitely a good thing. But I think that there's so many other things that like we could think about before that it's just like you know once you get your metabolism going, like maybe then you can think about stuff like that. But like I think people focus in on too many minute details before they're like functioning like at a baseline of good. Like just the fundamentals in anything. Like focus on the fundamentals of anything. Like for a couple of years before you want to like dive into the details of like this or that like thing that may or may not have a large benefit. It's kind of my take on it.
I fully agree. I think you answered this one earlier. Were nuts ever a significant part of ancestral diets? And I think we have to differentiate between wild, like tree nuts, versus like cashews, right? And almonds and pistachios.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that yes, depending on where any given group of humans developed and lived, and sort of created food customs. Tree nuts were a large part of the diet, but they weren't the same tree nuts that we're eating now, with the exception of a few things like pecans. Um, Almonds are a highly bred food crop, very high in omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids. Do I think people should eat a lot of almonds? Not really. It's an industrial crop as far as I'm concerned. Um, if we want to talk about nuts that are a little bit more uh, healthful and a little bit more in line with an ancestral context, pecans, which are actually a species of hickory, they're in the same genus as hickory. Pecans are a really good thing to look at. Um, Even though a wild hickory nut is quite a bit smaller than the domesticated, what they call improved pecans that we can buy at the store now, there's still a great advantage to consuming, say, a pecan over a cashew. Another good one is hazelnuts. Hazelnuts are another, especially if you're like a European person, you're descended from a European ancestry. Hazelnuts are a very big part of, were and still are a big part of the European diet, as well as Native American diets as well. Did have quite a few groups that ate a lot of hazelnuts as well. There's a lot of native hazelnut trees to North America. So I tend to stay away from things like the tropical nuts, like cashews, stuff like that. They don't really appeal to me. Cashews also, I don't think a lot of people know this, but like you can't eat like truly raw cashews are covered in a chemical that is the same as what you get when you get dermatitis from poison ivy. I actually had a friend one time that ate a raw cashew off of a plant in Costa Rica, and he got systemic dermatitis through his entire body. Like he had it in his intestines, in his butt, in his like groin, on his feet, underneath his toenails. Like, yeah, cashews are not like they're more than people realize. They're a highly industrialized food, and there's also all kinds of other implications with cashews: slave labor, shipping food across the world. There's all kinds of things with cashews. Just look into what kind of nuts are domestically produced where you live, and then just kind of go from there.
I love it. Yeah, it's funny. Brazil nuts are a fad right now. It's like 2 Brazil nuts a day if you're selenium. It's like, why not do raw goat's milk?
Exactly. Like Brazil nuts are good, but it's like they're from plantations in Brazil. They're probably picked by like enslaved indigenous people. Like, why not just let them keep their Brazil nuts, and like you can go get your gather your own nuts like down the street from your house. Just my take on things, though.
I like it. Last question, and then I have one more for you. How much protein do we actually need for athletes and normal people?
Honestly, I don't have a good answer to that. There's so many theories about that. I say eat as much as feels good to you. Like, if I get in about a pound of meat a day, that feels pretty good to me. I don't know how many grams of protein that is, but if I get in about roughly 16 ounces of, you know, whatever kind of meat, I have available, I feel like that's pretty good. And then maybe another few cups of milk and cheese and like some fruit in there, maybe like a few nuts here and there. Like I feel like that's pretty good. Um, I don't have an exact like. I know people love their numbers, like get X number of grams of this or that. Just eat the amount of protein that makes your body feel like it's functioning well and your digestion is like on point. Is really what you want to go for.
I like it. Yeah, I just do bone broth and, half a pound to a pound of grass-fed meat or elk or bison or venison, and I feel great doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's just the way to go.
So my question for you is on your wild rice and wild food warehouse. Could you just, in the last few minutes here, just kind of explain to the audience what it is and why it's awesome?
Yeah. So I started that company in like 2014. So it's been like 5 years
Mm.
now. And essentially, what I wanted to do is I wanted to just bring foods to people that like wild foods to people that would like they could integrate into their program and into their diet like easily without having to do a lot of like their own work. Like people are busy. A lot of people don't have time to go gather wild rice in Michigan like I do. So, I wanted to be sort of like a hub for people to go and produce their own food, not produce. I wanted to produce products for people that were wild, the quality that I get myself in wild foods, but to be able to offer that to people so they could add that into their program that they're trying to employ to create health. So currently, I'm only selling wild rice. I'm going to have a few more products up there probably in the next few months. It's kind of been a long process for me. Um, I want to do it all myself. I want to save up my money and I want to build my business organically. I know a lot of people want to get these big programs going and sort of like do a big launch and like I don't want to do any of that. Like I just want to be an organic company. I want to build relationships with people slowly over time to get my product out there. Like I don't want to be on the cover of Time magazine. Like that's not who I'm trying to appeal to. I'm trying to appeal to like a market of people that really want to go deep in their health and want to do things that like support their metabolism. That's the biggest, and that's one of the reasons why I really like the wild rice, and that's been like my flagship product, is because like that's a food very nutrient dense that people can easily add into their program. And like not only is it like a food, it's a supplement. It has a lot of nutrients in it that you're not going to otherwise get in a grain product, but it's right there, very bioavailable, easy to digest. There's no gluten in it. You know, other people that have not been able to eat grains that I know have tried the rice and they're like, wow, this stuff really like changed the game for me because I couldn't eat like any grains. The only carbs I could eat is like potatoes or honey. But it's like now I can enjoy that like, there's something satisfying about eating grains. Um, as demonized as they are in modern dieting culture, like grains brought us where we are. Like a lot of people talk about Western civilization and all this stuff. It's like if you want to talk about like civilization, like grains are it. Now I'm not so like sold on the idea of like modern civilization as it is, but it's like to say that grains are like so bad for us that they're going to kill us is like crazy because we're all alive because of wheat. Like for better or for worse, like all of our ancestors ate, especially if we're like European people, ate lots of wheat, and that helped them survive to the point that we're at now. Now, modern forms of these things are less than ideal, but that's one of the reasons why I created this company was so I could bring higher quality forms of foods that people once thought to be bad. Now they can bring these foods back into their life in a more holistic way. So that's kind of one of the reasons and the missions behind my company is to supply these sort of niche food products that people can feel good about eating.
I love it. One of my favorite meals is just grass-fed ground beef. It's like kind of bachelor diet. Grass-fed ground beef, your rice, some butter, some leek powder from Dr. Cowan's, and some like Icelandic sea salt. and I'll just eat that. Maybe some raw cheese on there, and it's amazing.
Oh yeah, that's an excellent meal. Some just any kind of red meat and wild rice, and maybe a little bit of some kind of condiment, some kind of spice powders, or a little bit of. I've really been digging jams, like fruit jams. Like I either make them myself or I just buy them. Organic wild blueberries and lingonberries and stuff like that, and just like that's a really popular way to eat meat in Europe is to put like fruit on it. So I've really been digging that with the wild rice, or something like potatoes or something like that. Just kind of mix it all together, and just it's just a quick, easy meal, like nutrient dense. Just kind of takes the guesswork out of like, what am I going to eat? It doesn't have to be this elaborate thing. It's just like basic, like to the point, nutrition.
Isn't that going to give you diabetes though? Just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, totally, man.
That's so much fructose.
Yeah, I mean, we could just talk about that for hours and hours. It's like if fructose was so bad, then like how did people survive eating tons and tons of fruit until now? But if you don't believe that there was fruit available until like 50 years ago, then I could see why you would believe that.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Ben. That was super awesome. And
yeah, we could continue talking for a few hours, I think. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, let's have you back on when you launch your other products. That'd be a lot of fun. And
sounds good.
Yeah, stay with me. I'm gonna close out the show. Thank you. All right, hope you guys got a kick out of that. I know I did. So much information. Really love the info on acorns and how to process them. I think that's really practical, useful, and perhaps even life-saving information. Especially if you live by oak trees, that is a skill that you should have. It's definitely a job, but you appreciate the store-bought flour and all of the easy-to-purchase foods that much more once you go through the whole process of making an acorn into an edible product. I highly recommend Ben's wild rice. I purchased it in bulk. You can go to wildfoodwarehouse.com. I'll put a link below and use the discount code Blackburn to save a little bit. That wild rice, hand harvested, wood parched, is just unbelievable. It'll blow any rice you've ever had out of the water. Ben Belty can also be found on Facebook. He's on Instagram. I'll put the links below where you can connect with him there. And if you want to support my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have all of my recommended products up there that I use myself. And you could also go to mitolife.co. I have a lot of exciting new products in the works. Right now, there are some enzyme products up there that are very powerful. And as always, if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends. Subscribe. I release a new episode every Friday, and leave a comment if you've benefited. Anyone that gets into my work, I always point them to this podcast because I think it's very unique, and I have very unique guests on. I have a very unique perspective, and I think a lot of people get benefit from it because it's different from what the alternative mainstream is saying. Today's quote is by Max Planck. Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because, in the last analysis, we ourselves are a part of the mystery that we are trying to solve.